Okay, we are ready to begin our reading room. Thanks for joining me. We are here on day 222. I didn't say it enough today. It's July 22nd. We are doing 5 deuces. 5 deuces. Can you really win a hand with 5 deuces? You sure can. You sure can. Well, no, because that would be a false deck. Oh. That'd be a fake deck, 5 deuces. Seriously? All right, we are here with a dangerous idea. Chapter 13. This is our book by Debbie Levy. You can see it right there. Boop, 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 boop. The Scopes Trial, the original fight over science in schools. I didn't show you guys my flowers. We need to see the flowers because they are so beautiful. Spent a little money on those. Cha-ching. Let's go. We're going to leave it like that. Chapter 13, in the beginning. Those might be the most famous 3 words of all time, in the beginning. As a unit, the being the most famous of the 3. Judge John T. Ralston issued his first ruling in Tennessee v. Scopes. Before he even got to the courthouse, coats off would be the rule in his courtroom, he told reporters 2 days before the trial. It was too hot to require business attire, coats and collars and ties. These were the days of removable shirt collars. What'd that look like? These were also the days before air conditioning. Members of the press applauded this merciful decision, which, as things turned out, was pretty much the only brisk moment of the trial, which was about to unfold at its own unhurried, summary pace. On Friday morning, July 10th, the judge, rosy-faced and clean-shaven, made his way through the leafy-fenced square oak, elm, poplar, and sweet gum trees, and movie cameras and strolling musicians and food vendors that surrounded the red brick courthouse. He arrived with his wife, 2 daughters, his wife's mother, and under his arm, a Bible. Judge Ralston told news reporters that he'd prepared for the proceedings by spending hours each day in his library reading law books and in his garden tending his vegetables. After posing for photographers and newsreel movie cameras, the judge and his family made their way up the wooden staircase to the large courtroom on the 2nd floor. The space was already crammed and stifling hot with spectators and press people. Judge Ralston was beaming, the New York Times observed. He is going to enjoy every minute of this trial. Maybe the judge was also smiling because, in anticipation of the big show, the courthouse had been repaired and renovated, and the courtroom itself repainted, transformed from a dingy gray to a peaceful cream color. Maybe he was smiling because, as Nellie Kenyon reported, as part of this buffing up, he has been provided with a new chair for his stand, which he has been wishing a long time. Next, through the big doors of the courtroom, came Clarence Darrow. His great shoulders bowed, his face creased with deep wrinkles. With him came John Randolph Neal, the law professor who had attached himself to the case as soon as John Scopes had been arrested. Dudley Field Malone, the lawyer who had joined Clarence in offering their services pro bono to John, and Arthur Garfield Hayes, an eminent New York civil liberties lawyer and the ACLU leader. Next came John, in his horn-rimmed glasses, open collar, and shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. He might be any college senior on vacation, the New York Times reporter wrote. Another newspaper columnist wrote that John looked like a young man who so far forgot himself as to say darn out loud in a YMCA building. In other words, an upstanding, clean-cut youngster. John was accompanied by his father, Thomas Scopes, in from Paducah. George Rapelier, the man who got John into this fix, sat next to John and his dad. So here, I should have read it like this. Here we have the empty second floor courtroom in the Rhea County Courthouse before the trial of John Scopes. And then here we have John Scopes and his father, Thomas Scopes, on the porch of the boarding house in Dayton where John lived. So there. And here. All right, nice show. Next came applause, which could mean only one thing: the arrival of the main attraction. Here comes William Jennings Bryan, the WGN radio announcer intoned. He enters now, his bald pate like a sunrise over Key West. Will Hurd turned to look at the radio man and laughed. Judge Ralston wasn't immune to the great commoner's magnetic field. He walked over to shake Will's hand. Will and Clarence greeted each other too and talked for a while, their hands chummily on each other's shoulders. Photographers climbed on chairs and tables to capture the scene. It happened to be the anniversary of the day back in 1896 when Will had first been nominated to run for president. Mary Bryan, Will's wife, sat behind her husband in the wheelchair she used because of debilitating arthritis. Ruby Darrow, Clarence's wife, he and Jessie had divorced many years before, sat nearby. Judge Ralston rapped his gavel. The court will come to order, he said. The Reverend Cartwright will open court with prayer. And pray he did. The Reverend L.M. Cartwright, he prayed for 8 long paragraphs interminably in John's view. A wave of amen swept over the courtroom when he finished. Clarence Darrow, famous for his non-belief in God, stood quietly. The morning was taken up mostly by legal technicalities because John was accused of teaching any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible. Judge Ralston decided that he needed to read aloud the first chapter of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, the judge began, God created heaven and earth. People were shedding their outerwear. Clarence removed his suit jacket, revealing blue suspenders and a yellowish shirt. Will took off his black alpaca coat, a trademark element of his usual dress, his black tie and the collar to his shirt. The other lawyers at the counsel tables, prosecutors and defense alike, also gave in to the heat, except for defense lawyer Dudley Field Malone. His double-breasted suit jacket remained buttoned. The temperature soared, and he remained suited up. Other mere mortals were in awe of his fortitude. When the judge finished his lengthy Bible reading, he added a personal note. I regard a violation of this statute as a high misdemeanor, he mused. And in making this declaration, I make no reference to the policy or constitutionality of the statute, but to the evil example of the teacher disregarding constituted authority in the very presence of the undeveloped mind whose thought and morals he directs and guides. Judge Ralston carries on in this vein for a bit longer before wrapping up with a few words about proceeding with open minds. Coming after his assertion that John had set an evil example, it seemed a little late already for that. The courtroom was no cooler after the lunch break. Jackets stayed off except for Dudley Malone's. Will and many others in the courtroom tried to beat the heat with palm leaf fans, some emblazoned with the E.E. Robinson Company logo. Doc Robinson did not miss an opportunity to promote business. Some with a pressing question from a toothpaste company. Do your gums bleed? I've got to get those two ads marked over here with my little green little Post-it notes that I sliced. The pressing question for many people in Dayton was how they could snag ringside seats to the biggest show in town, possibly the biggest show in their lives. The courtroom was large but couldn't hold more than 300 people, including standing room, and the press presence left few places for ordinary citizens. One way to jump the line was to get on the jury. After all, jurors could expect to be in the room for every bit of the drama. Opening statements by Bryan and Darrow, examination of witnesses by Bryan and Darrow, objections and arguments by Bryan and Darrow, closing statements by Bryan and Darrow. What could be better? Over the break, the sheriff had rounded up 100 men from whom to draw a jury of 12. The prosecution and defense lawyers would spend the afternoon questioning the potential jurors one by one until they filled out the jury box with 12 men whom neither side nor the judge had rejected because of perceived bias. It went like this. W.F. Robertson, number 12, called out the sheriff, chewing on a toothpick as he spoke. Judge Ralston, come round, Mr. Robertson. Are you a householder or a freeholder in Rhea County? W.F. Robertson, yes, sir. Judge, you are a householder? Yes, sir. A householder simply lived in a home. A freeholder was the legal owner of the house. Both were eligible to serve as jurors in Tennessee, unlike, for example, women or African Americans. Have you formed or expressed an opinion as to the guilt or innocence of this defendant, John T. Scopes? Well, to some extent, Judge. What do you base that opinion on, Mr. Robertson? Rumor. That might not seem entirely fair to John, assuming Robertson's opinion tended toward the guilt of the defendant, John T. Scopes, which was absolutely a fair assumption. W.F. Robertson might seem to be an excellent candidate to be dismissed by the judge for bias, but no. And do you think you can wholly disregard your opinion? Judge Ralston continued, and go into the jury box and try the case on the law and the evidence and render a fair and impartial verdict? Yes, sir. I think he is a competent juror, gentlemen, the judge said. I will pass him to the state first. The state, that is, the prosecution, was happy to have W.F. Robertson with his rumor-based view of John's guilt on the jury and had no further questions for him. Next came Clarence's opportunity. Have you ever given any special attention to this case? Well, no more than just reading the newspapers. Are you satisfied that you could try it with perfect fairness to both sides? Yes, sir, I think I could. All right, we will take him. And that was that for W.F. Robertson. What could Clarence do? You couldn't find a jury of 12 completely unbiased men in Rhea County for this case. W.F. Robertson might be as good as a juror as John could get. Clarence probed a bit deeper with another potential juror. Jim Riley. Riley was a tall man with gold-rimmed glasses who used to work in the mines, told Judge Ralston that he'd only heard rumors about the case, who hadn't, but that he had not formed opinions about John's guilt or innocence. "Do you know anything about evolution?" Clarence asked. "No, not particularly," said Ryan. "Heard about it?" "Yes, I've heard about it." "Know what it is?" "I don't know much about it." Riley said he hadn't really talked to anyone about evolution and hadn't studied enough about it to have an opinion on whether it was wrong. "Ever heard anybody preach any sermons on it?" "No, sir." "Ever hear Mr. Bryan speak about it?" "No, sir." "Ever read anything said about it?" "No, sir," Riley responded. "I can't read." "Well," Clarence said, "you are fortunate." He accepted Jim Riley as a juror. Then came J.P. Massengill, a minister at not one, not two, not three, but 4 churches in the countryside. "Ever preach on evolution?" Clarence asked him. "I don't think so. Definitely, that is, on evolution as a whole," Massengill responded. "Yes," Massengill said this time, "I haven't as a subject just taken that up in connection with other subjects. I've referred to it in a discussing it." "Against it or for it?" Clarence asked, as if he didn't know the answer. "I'm strictly for the Bible," Massengill said. "I'm talking about evolution," Clarence said. "I'm not talking about the Bible. Did you preach for or against evolution?" Massengill turned towards Judge Ralston. "Is that a fair question, Judge?" "Yes, answer the question." "Well, I preached against it, of course," Massengill admitted. Applause broke out in the courtroom. At Clarence's request, Judge Ralston excluded Pastor Massengill from joining the jury. And so it went. Judge Ralston chewed gum, looked at the headlines in the afternoon newspaper from Knoxville, and occasionally waved to familiar faces among the spectators. Will sat quietly, wiping his head with a handkerchief from time to time. The court didn't need anywhere near the 100 potential jurors who'd been summoned. The lawyers selected their 12 jurors, most of whom said that they read their Bible regularly and attended church regularly, all of whom swore they were not prejudiced against John Scopes. Jury selection over, the judge adjourned court for the weekend. Nellie Kenyon's article on Saturday in the Chattanooga News provided many biographies of each of the jurors. She noted that one was a shipping clerk, one a school teacher, and the rest farmers. There are 8 Republicans and 4 Democrats. She also reported matter-of-factly, I guess I didn't read this. "That was a rather squirrely answer." Clarence tried again. "Did you ever preach on evolution?" All right, and here we have in the witness chair and in front of the radio microphone, a man undergoes questioning to determine whether he will join the jury. All right, pretty cool. The out-of-town press was more malicious than matter-of-fact. The grade of intelligence also revealed by the attitudes of the 12 indicates to this observer that at least 9 of these Scopes jurors had never used a 4-syllable word in their lives until the term evolution was crowded into the local vocabulary, sneered one correspondent whose dispatches went out to multiple newspapers. "Let's get you on camera, girl." Another predicted, Scopes is a convicted man unless a miracle happens and the Lord speaks in a way that the devout hill folk of Tennessee do not expect. Jury selection, he added, was quite a study of suspenders and hickory shirts. Some journalists wrote their accounts as if competing for a prize for the snarkiest. There is no doubt that Scopes will be found guilty, a writer known for his wit opined, and sentenced to read all of Bill Bryan's books. After that, Darrow will protest the verdict on the grounds of cruel and unusual punishment. No matter, these dozen jurors would not be reading sneering articles from Pittsburgh or San Francisco or Boston. Come Monday morning, they would be the lucky ones in their ringside seats, listening to the great William Jennings Bryan and the great, if infidel, Clarence Darrow. That's what they thought anyway. So here, a satirical cartoon by Clifford K. Berryman of the Washington Star shows a Dayton native bathing in the publicity of the trial with William Jennings Bryan beaming down from the sky. And then what does it say there in the little bubble, which isn't a bubble? It says publicity. That's what he's bathing in. And it says, my first real bath. Gee, ain't it great? And on his chest, it's tattooed Dayton. All right, so that's that picture right there. And then we have newspapers from coast to coast covered the trial in great detail, often on their front pages. Scopes defense opens fight for scientific testing. And maybe that's the reason, maybe that's when they really started the scientific testing, right? Maybe that's the reason why this is so really significant in my life. And why I recently and way distantly in the past been called a monkey. A monkey? It's a language like so antiquated. And antiquated, get it? I mean, I get it. Like, do you understand? When you're using that kind of antiquated language, it's like I have to ask you, do you understand? Okay. Cranks and freaks flock to Dayton. The Philadelphia Inquirer. 9 farmers on jury chose to try Scopes, and that's a evolutionists predict defeat for Scopes. Interesting, isn't it? I'm trying to get my fingers out of the way. I think so. Keep her going. Chapter 14. 2 strangled puppies. What? This is horrific. William Jennings Bryan may have disappointed spectators in the courtroom who had come to hear him speak on that first day. His only performance involved sweating and energetically waving his fan. His voice was not heard beyond a cough, as one newspaper put it, but over the weekend, Will made up for his silence. He spoke to a standing room only crowd at Dayton's First Methodist Church. He addressed a Sunday school class. Judge Ralston was in attendance. He gave a sermon on the courthouse lawn. The judge attended that too. Clarence spent much of his time on with the other lawyers for the defense, formulating legal strategies for the week ahead. As for the defendant, John took some of the visiting journalists to one of his favorite swimming holes on the Tennessee River. He spent part of Sunday reading messages. I better make sure I've got this on the right thing. All right. Ugh. that were pouring in for him. Messenger boys were kept busy delivering telegrams to the accused teacher at his home, reported the Birmingham News. John told the paper that many of them were supportive, an improvement over the "you should be burned at the stake" letters he'd received before the trial. On Monday, July 13th, court was delayed as Judge Ralston spent time with the press. He posed for photographs and for the movie cameras. The newsreel film would be flown out of Dayton in time to be shown in movie theaters by the next day. He entertained reporters with excerpts from his Daily Mail. "Dear Judge," he read from one letter, "what I want to know is, did Noah put on the ark flies, cockroaches, bed bugs, sheep toads, scorpions, and rattlesnakes? If he did, he sought to have been hung as a horse thief or shot." He should have. He ought to have been. I don't think he sought it. He ought it. After leisurely pleasantries, court once again opened with the prayer. Everyone stood. "O God our Father, thou who art the creator of the heaven and the earth, and the sea and all that is in them," the pastor began. It went on for a while. The Reverend asked for the Almighty's blessing on the judge, the jury, the lawyers, the journalists, others inside the court, and those on the outside to the ends of the earth. Since the courtroom has overflowing, there were in fact plenty of people outside. For their benefit, WGN had installed a loudspeaker system to carry the sound of the proceedings to various gathering places in town. For those farther away, in Chicago, for example, which could be considered the ends of the earth, and to some in Dayton, the radio announcer had pushed through the crowd to place his microphone up where the action was. The prayer was concluding, "We ask in the name of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ." The pastor's amen echoed around the room, out of the courtyard, around the country. Arthur Garfield Hayes, distinguished Jewish lawyer for the defense, whose Lord and Savior was not Jesus Christ, was quiet. Court called to order. Everyone blessed. Microphones arranged, and a new addition to the room, electric fans placed here and there. It was time for the jury to enter. Roll was called to make sure all 12 were there. "What is your plea, gentlemen?" Judge Ralston asked John's legal team. Meaning, is John pleading innocent or guilty? "Neither, not yet." "May it please your honor," responded John Neal, "we make a motion to quash the indictment." A motion to quash the indictment. To quash something in law is to nullify it, to make it go away. Not the same as squashing something, but not so very different either. Indictment is a legal term for a formal criminal charge. So John's lawyers were asking Judge Ralston to dismiss the charges against John without going through a trial. This was not unusual. Defense lawyers regularly asked judges to dismiss their clients' criminal cases before the trial. John's lawyers had toted up more than a dozen reasons why the charges were legally insufficient and should be quashed. Now they would present their arguments in support of their motion, first John Neal, then Arthur Hayes. Then the prosecutors would get to counter, and then Clarence Darrow would wrap up. The judge, spectators, people outside the courthouse, and the jury, the most important set of spectators, all would hear Clarence, the greatest trial lawyer in the country, cast his spell in the courtroom for the first time. Except no, the jury wouldn't. "Mr. Officer," Judge Ralston said to the blue uniformed policeman standing by his bench, "you may let the jury go." Out they went, but not before some complaining by Clarence and his team. They wanted the jurors to hear his arguments about why the case should be dismissed. The judge and prosecutors wanted jurors shielded from the discussion of law that might influence how they viewed the evidence they would eventually hear. "The court will be more at ease with the jury not present," said Judge Ralston. We will be less at ease, Clarence grumped. Temperatures were soaring. The humidity and oppressive heat laughed at the electric fans spinning their blades uselessly. The judge removed his suit coat. The lawyers did too, Clarence revealing blue suspenders and a shirt with vague coloring. To quote the New York Times, Will Bryan sat in a collarless shirt working his palm leaf fan. And there was Dudley Malone for the defense once again, but buttoned up in his double-breasted brown suit, white shirt, and blue knitted tie peering out the front. Everyone noticed. Hours passed as John Neal, Arthur Hayes, and prosecutors Ben McKenzie and Tom Stewart presented arguments. Finally, it was the great defender's turn. I will hear you, Colonel, Judge Ralston said to Clarence. Clarence wasn't a colonel, but town leaders had given him the honorary military title when he arrived in Dayton. Will Bryan was a colonel by virtue of his non-combat service a quarter century earlier in the Spanish-American War, and he was frequently called Colonel Bryan. So if the prosecutor was going to be addressed as Colonel, by golly, the defense attorney would also be called Colonel, keeping things fair and square. I shall always remember that this court is the first one that ever gave me a great title of Colonel, Clarence began, and I hope it will stick to me when I get back north. He knew it would not and should not, but that wasn't the point. He was just warming up the audience. I want to take you back to your home with you. I want you to take it back to your home with you, Colonel, replied Judge Ralston. Clarence, the not really a colonel, began his assault with some plain words aimed directly at the opposing and actual Colonel William Jennings Bryan. He said, is responsible for this foolish, mischievous, and wicked act. Stretching out his arm as if brandishing a sword, Clarence boomed. Here we find today as brazen and as bold an attempt to destroy learning as was ever made in the Middle Ages. Eyes flashing, he added. The only difference is we have not provided that they shall be burned at the stake, but there is time for that. Your Honor, we have to approach these things gradually. Apart from the slash of sarcasm, Clarence mostly veered away from insults and worked his way through the reasons the judge should quash the charges against John. The Butler Act, he argued, violated the Tennessee state constitution's guarantee of religious freedom. That is what was foisted on the people of the state, that it should be a crime in the state of Tennessee to teach any theory of the origin of man except that contained in the divine account as recorded in the Bible. But the state of Tennessee, under an honest and fair interpretation of the Constitution, has no more right to teach the Bible as a divine book than that the Quran is one, or the Book of Mormons, or the Book of Confucius, or the Buddha, or the essays of Emerson, or any one of the 10,000 books to which human souls have gone for consolation and aid in their troubles. Next, Clarence argued that the law was impermissibly vague. What did it even mean, he asked. How was John Scopes or anyone to know what was allowed and what was forbidden under its ambiguous terms? Does this statute state what you shall teach and what you shall not? Oh no, not at all. Does it say you cannot teach the earth is round because Genesis says it is flat? No. Does it say you cannot teach that the earth is millions of ages old because the account of Genesis makes it less than 6,000 years old? Oh no, it doesn't state that. If it did, you could understand it. Of course, if the Butler Act had said that, you couldn't teach that Earth was millions of years old because it would contradict the Bible. Clarence undoubtedly would have attacked that part of laws too, but he was working with what he had, pulling at every loose string that he could find in the fabric of anti-evolution law. How else was the law impossibly vague, making it impossible to know whether a teacher's teachings violated it or not? Clarence noted that the Bible contained two different creation stories. Which story of man's creation was the one a teacher must not contradict? He noted that the Bible was made up of 66 books. Must a teacher master all of those books to make sure he didn't violate the Butler Act? That was not the way the criminal laws were supposed to work. And anyway, who is the chief mogul that can tell us what the Bible means? He or they shall write a book and make it plain and distinct so we would know. Let us look at it. There are in America at least 500 different sects or churches, all of which quarrel with each other and the importance and non-importance of certain things or the construction of certain passages. All along the line, they do not agree among themselves and cannot agree among themselves. They never have and probably never will. With a thumb hooked under one of his suspenders, Clarence prowled the courtroom as he spoke, by turns whispering, booming, easygoing, stern, jovial, raging, he put on a show. He raised his shoulders up in a hunch, then dropped them down to shoot his big head forward. He stood swaying gently and speaking slowly, and then he was on the move again, roaring. As he stalked and gestured, a small rip in the left elbow of his shirt grew bigger and bigger until the sleeve was torn all the way around. All eyes were on Clarence. Will Bryan sat expressionless, his mouth drawn into a straight line, arms crossed for much of the time. Apart from Clarence's voice, the only other sound was a clicking of telegraph keys as operators transmitted the scene they were witnessing to the outside world. With those hundreds of Tennesseans watching him, Clarence was aware of his audience. Even as his arguments may have appalled these God-fearing people, he also acknowledged their beliefs. He would not tear them down. What is the Bible, Your Honor? I have read it myself. I might read it more or more wisely. I know there are millions of people in the world who look on it as being a divine book, and I have not the slightest objection to it. I know there are millions of people in the world who derive consolation in their times of trouble and solace in times of distress from the Bible. I haven't any fault to find with them at all. But the Bible, Clarence insisted, was not meant to substitute for a book of science, nor was the Bible at odds with acceptance of science, including the science of evolution. There were plenty of people, little itchy nose. There were plenty of people, even right there in Tennessee, who believed in God and acknowledged evolution. And then Clarence said, along comes somebody who says, we have got to believe it as I believe it. It is a crime to know more than I know, and they publish a law to inhibit learning. He'd been talking for 2 hours. His argument was a journey. It might appear meandering, with visits to the far-flung territories of constitutional law, legislative drafting, the role of religion in modern life, the meaning of the divine, the nature of the Bible, but Clarence had a map. Now he was going to bring it back home, back to the wickedness and foolishness that he laid on the Butler Act and on Will and on fundamentalist Christians in his opening lines, but not before he dangled a metaphor that seemed designed to make sure that everyone was still paying attention. To strangle puppies is good, he said, when they grow up into mad dogs, maybe. What? Again, what looked like a meander was in fact full of meaning. Did Judge Ralston and the people of Tennessee think their anti-evolution law was a tame little puppy? Clarence did not. He believed it was going to lead to evil. It was going to grow into a mad dog. I will tell you what is going to happen, Clarence said, and I do not pretend to be a prophet, but I do not need to be a prophet to know. Your Honor knows the fires that have been lighted in America to kindle religious bigotry and hate. You know that there is no suspicion which possesses the minds of men like bigotry and ignorance and hatred. If today, but for the judge, it was quitting time. Sorry to interrupt your argument, he interrupted, but it is adjourning time. If I may, I can close in 5 minutes, Clarence responded. Proceed tomorrow, the judge said. If today, Clarence proceeded, despite the clear command to stop, he leaned so close to the bench where Judge Ralston sat that the finger he was pointing almost touched the man's flushed face. If today you can take a thing like evolution and make it a crime to teach it in the public school, tomorrow you can make it a crime to teach it in the private schools, and the next year you can make it a crime to teach it in the hustings or the church. I don't know. At the next session, you may ban books in the newspaper. Soon, you may set Catholic against Protestant and Protestant against Protestant and try to foist your own religion upon the minds of men. If you can do one, you can do the other. Ignorance and fanaticism is ever busy and needs feeding. Always it is feeding and gloating for more. Today it is the public school teaching, tomorrow the private, the next day the preachers and the lecturers, the magazines, the books, the newspapers. After a while, Your Honor, it is the setting of man against man and creed against creed, until with flying banners and beating drums we are marching backward to the glorious ages of the 16th century, when bigots burn the men who dared to bring any intelligence and enlightenment and culture to the human mind. Now Clarence was done. His elbow was sticking out of the hole that had expanded as he prowled around his arena. It was a classic Darrow performance. He had navigated his audience down the slippery slope that led from the Butler Act to book bans to a society seething with bigotry and bloodshed. Welcome to today. Wonderful speech, said more than one person to Clarence as he walked away from the courthouse. There were other reactions reporters recorded hissing at the close of Clarence's argument. Another witnessed women emerging from the courtroom and looking at each other in horror. "The damned infidel," exclaimed one of them. H.L. Mencken, the viperous columnist from Baltimore, wrote that Clarence's brilliance was wasted. The net effect of Clarence Darrow's great speech yesterday seemed to be precisely the same as if he had balled it up a rain spout in the interior of Afghanistan. The morons in the audience, when it was over, simply hissed. That night, oppressive heat gave way to a tremendous thunderstorm. Thunder crashed, lightning flashed, rain came down in buckets. The local electrical grid, not entirely reliable in the best of times, failed. Dayton went dark. "I ain't a-going to say just exactly that this is a judgment," said Buckshot Morgan of the blackout, "but it certainly is powerful mysterious." That's the way he said it. Buckshot Morgan was an imaginary character invented by a nationally syndicated newspaper columnist, W.O. McGeehan. The joke spread among members of the press. Clarence's infidel speech had brought God's fury on Monkey Town. Next comes chapter 15, Prayers and Chairs. In our book, A Dangerous Idea by Debbie Levy. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, where we are reading about the Scopes monkey trial, the original fight over science in the schools. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. We are done with day 1 of our 3 days on July 7/22, day 222. I know. Crazy. I'm putting this back on. And it's taken me a minute before we say adios to today's classroom. Thanks for joining me here. You have been with the teacher, where we are continuing in all different ways. Don't forget to make your mind, your body, and your spirit healthier. Thanks for joining me.